Cool. So today we're back again. Going to be doing some more work on Compose. If you were here yesterday, we were taking a look at tidying up how we handle the events that passed from the composables through to the view model. And we did a lot of cool tidying up. There was previously about 8 functions being passed from the view model through to the composables, wherever that's gone. And now we have a single an event handler, a function that can pass a sealed class type, which will be handled by the view model. Again, that was influenced by some work that was done by Chris Baines in his TV project. We're happy that's now the only difference is in this project he's using, I think it's coroutine channels to collect from an event stream. For now, I'm just going to leave it like this because I haven't used channels before. Maybe that's a learning point for me to try that, but for now I'm happy with how this is working, so we can maybe focus more on the compose side of things and then come back to that at a later date. So where were we yesterday? So with these functions, our state is still being sent to our view model with the use of these creation events. There was a couple of things that were pointed out yesterday that I was going to look at today. The first one was that this event doesn't currently do anything, and it never did. So, A, that's a good point to have tests, and B, we should probably fix that. So my plan was to work on some tests tomorrow. So today we're going to get that working, and then also tidy this up. This is a very big when check, and it can be a little bit too tricky to follow. So what we can do is we can take that and we can try and sort of have our UI state emitted based on what one has been triggered. So at the moment, you can see here each of these functions just takes the current UI state and sets the UI state to what's been passed in, which should be the actual argument. So what we can try and do at some point today is build our UI state based on this, and maybe just remove each of these individual functions, because I find that a bit of a cognitive overload having to jump back and forth between these when it's just setting a single value. We can probably do that in the same place. So what we'll do to begin with is we'll take a look at fixing this one. So yeah, so previously you could set the name, and then you can also set the store name. But I removed the store name because I didn't find it very useful. And we already had 6 questions. The last one is the completion state. So we had 6 questions, and I felt like that was enough. So the store name was what I removed. Except I never update the naming of this. So what we want to do is we want to have this to set categories. And here what we're going to do is we're just going to call this categories. Because at the moment, before I rerun it, you can see I'm calling this, but nothing's actually happening. What they should do is they should be highlighted. When you select one, it should become selected, and if you unselect it, unselected, and then that's how we know that the state is being saved, because in the composables, again, this is the incorrect naming, the selected state is based off of what is in the list that comes from the view model. So from the creation state from the view model, we get the current categories, and then we build a list of selected items. If the currently selected items contains one of these, then we set the opacity to 1, otherwise it's 0.7. So 1 indicates that it's selected, and at the moment that's not happening at all. So now that we've triggered that in our view model, we should be able to rerun this, and it should work. Because now that we're setting this state is being set and it's being emitted back to our composables, so that should be reflected in the selection state. And whilst we're here, I'm just going to rename this because this has been tripping me up for the last few days. I'm just going to again rename it to category step. And that should be the one. Cool, so then if we launch it again, cool, there you go, that's what we want. Now we can see that when we select one, they are selected. Though I do find it kind of hard to see what one is like, to differentiate the difference between them. So I'm going to reduce that to 0.6 just to see if it makes a little slight improvement to tell what is actually selected and what isn't. It's not a huge difference, but it might be enough just to signify, and we can always reduce that more if needed. But that was a quick fix, and now it's like that's working. Again, it's a great signal to have some tests there. That's a little bit better. I'll live with that for now. Cool. So one of the things I wanted to try and do was try and tidy this up a bit, because I find this very hard to follow. Like, it's a very big check, and then also, like I said, it's a lot of back and forth for pretty much the same code. At the same time, I don't want to make it so that try and generalize it too much and then it becomes too restrictive in future. So these are pretty much the same. Like, all of these things, most of them are the same. We take the current value and we take the current value and we set the property based on the function that's being called. The only different one is when the form is completed, because when the form is completed, we want to create the belonging. So currently this doesn't actually do anything. I'm still building the API. Currently this doesn't do anything, but what the plan will be is that this will mark the screen as loading. A loading indicator will be displayed, and then the item will be sent to the API, and when that's completed, the screen will close, or the completion state will be displayed. I haven't quite decided yet, but that's the only one that's different, because that one needs to trigger an API request. So I think we're still going to need a when block, but the only difference is that this one's going to need to be treated differently. So what I was kind of thinking in my head, I'm just going to do this and then maybe change my mind at a later date, is something like this. So the UI state is built, and then instead of having each function being called, we could just do something like that. So when it's the name change, we set the name to the event. Yeah. So we set the name property of the UI state to the event name, and this allows us to have everything in line. So we could do exactly the same thing here. So instead of calling set categories, we could do something like this dot categories is event. Start running out of screen space soon. Cool. Yeah. I might roll with this and see how it feels when it's done. I think it will be a lot less back and forth. The only thing is, as I mentioned, is this one's going to be different, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. So we can do this dot event dot frequency. This one will be the days. This dot date mind equals event. We can do a similar thing here. Positive reasons equals event dot notes. Similar thing here. And negative reasons is event dot notes. And the next one's probably not going to be in line because there's a little bit more going on. So I'm going to keep that side of some brackets just so it's a bit more readable. And the negative step again is there. Cool. And yeah, so the only difference is this one, because we are building. We do need to build a UI state, but at the same time, we also want to send an API request. So what I might do is, just to make it a bit clearer that there's a difference, is if event is creation event dot form completed, and just have it in an else block, because I think that might be clearer, that to signify that there is a big difference between the two events. So in this case we still need to set the UI state, create belonging, but we want to send the request to the API. So yeah, so what should we have to do? So if the event is the form completed status, then we want to send the data to the API and also build the UI state based on it being loading. And then otherwise, we want to set the UI state based on the event that's being triggered. So yeah, still feels like a big when block. I mean, there is a lot of events. Again, I don't want it to become too general because it becomes a bit hard to manage. If these were, say, if we had to split this out, we could have more lines there, like to have more stuff going on. Or if there was a lot going on, we could split it out into separate function. But I think this is a lot more obvious. When this event is triggered, we want to set this property, and so on. This removes a lot of lines of code, but still kind of helps to keep things simple. A few modules are a lot more concise now. I mean, we just removed how many functions? Yeah, I'm going to count those, but I think there's about 8 functions. So in terms of cognitive load, for me working on this, it's a nice improvement, and that should still work fine. I think he says famous last words. I think what is going to happen now is we are going to. Oh, there you go. We've rerun. Cool. I think still seems to be working fine. That's a bit nicer. I think I quite like that. Yeah. Cool. So I think I don't know if I've got time today, but I think what I'll probably do this tomorrow is add some tests for this view model, because what we want to do is make sure that when we call this, that the correct event is handled properly, and then the UI state is reflected based on the data that's changed. Because there's some logic here which, these are very simple. These are just taking the value, setting it, but we can have tests to set the correct ones are set, and then for these remaining ones, this is a bit more logic going on. So we want to make sure that that's performing correctly. Cool. So hopping back over to the content. I was hoping today we could. I read somewhere that there was a Dev 17 of Compose coming out today. I can't remember where I read it. Might have just been Twitter, but that doesn't appear to be in the case. So hopefully in the stream soon we'll get to go through the fun of updating the Compose version and seeing what's changed. Cool. So I'm just trying to think. See, I'm even struggling to find what to do because this class is so big. I've seen in some cases there's been separate files, people having separate files for grouping composables. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this yet, because again, thinking about cognitive load, although there's a lot going on in this file, there's if you've got to hop back and forth between different files, it becomes a bit difficult to manage stuff. So what I might do is try to maybe with the remaining time is just take a look at some splitting out some resources. Not the most exciting thing, but we can try and tidy things up. So, and we haven't looked at how we can do that yet in these things. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our creation module. We've got some strings. So yeah, we've got some string resources already. So what we're going to do here is just take out some more resources just to tidy things up a bit. So we've got this. So we'll make a new string for name label completed. And we'll have this as close. And then what you can do is, so we're still declaring our string resources just as we would in Android currently in our strings XML file. Compose has a collection of functions for accessing resources. So for example, here we can access a string resource by its ID. We can also do similar things with formatting. So how in Android currently you can say get string, and then you can do variable arguments comma separated for the formatting. So if you have like a %s indicator inside of a string, you can use the var args to kind of pass through the values that should be replaced there. So you can do a similar thing with compose here, and we don't need that, but that's just to show you what can be done. So again, instead of hard coding this string here, we're going to use the string resource composable function, and this pretty much does under the hood what we currently do in Android: get the reference to the current context and retrieve the string. You can do this yourself if you want to get the current context. This is just kind of a helper function that takes that, reduces the lines of code that you're doing. So we can do that thing there, and we've got it. Similar thing for this one. We do another thing, message completed, and we'll take that string and we'll simplify that a bit, just to tidy things up a bit. Slowly, bit by bit, we're getting there. It's a pretty long message. Wonder if we can take that bit there. Get rid of those speech marks. Oh yeah, classic. How many times have you forgotten that when you're making your strings? Cool. So yeah, we'll do the same again there. String resource, string, and access the resource. Cool. Don't think there's any more. There was an chance for us to use an array. Yeah. So this should probably be an array of items, because we don't want that in our code. So what I'll do here is we'll make a new array. String array, category options, and we'll just declare that we're not going to split them out into separate strings for now, just because partly can't be bothered, and partly part of me feels like this should come from the API. So this might change anyway. Just for now, I can't even remember how to spell it, even though it's there. Just for now, I think we're just going to split this out here just to make it a little bit easier to deal with. So we'll just type these out and then have it in place. So with that done, one more. We then need to take our. So we want to get our string array, which works the same way as the string resource option, just as we just did. Again, under the hood, is doing pretty much exactly the same thing that we're currently doing in Android. It's getting a reference to the current context, and then retrieving the string array based on the ID. And then, when we've got that, I can't even remember what I called it now, even though it's only a moment ago. Category options. We can do that, and that should be all good. Is it not going to complain? Oh, I thought it was going to complain because it's an array and not a string. But maybe I didn't even need it to be a list in the first place. Let's just check that. Where's it being used? Oh yeah, I guess it's just looping through them, so doesn't really matter. Nice. Cool. That should work. Yeah, nice, cool. Again, no visual change there, but just looking good. So we got. I'm just looking at this box. So I think if you remember, I think it was the first stream, we made this composable called rounded background box. Thinking, wonder if we can reuse that here, because what that does is it's got a modifier. So what it does is it creates a rounded background, colors it to the secondary color from the theme, and then fills the max width. What we could do is, I wonder, I don't want to make this too flexible. How do I word that? I don't want to make it. I don't want to try and generalize it for use everywhere, because you get to that place where you try and make something work for everything, and then it just becomes impossible to maintain and work with. So what I'm gonna try and do is basically pass in a modifier, because filling the max width, I think the problem here is that by default we're setting the modifier to be the max width, and that basically says you can only use it for these specific cases. I mentioned previously in one of the streams that what the aim would be eventually for this would be that we would be able to place this inside of a reusable UI module, and then that UI module could be used elsewhere in our app. So for example, in the authentication screen I have this same kind of rounded box background, so in that case, like, that might not fill the width. So I think we want to be able to pass in a modifier and have the place that's using that box declare how that should be styled, like in terms of the modifications. The shape is fine, the background color is fine, because for now anyway, because that is why we've made this composable. But in terms of the actual sizing, the positioning, I think that should be down to where it's being used. So for example here, we could now, we'd pass in the modifier and say fill max width, and that, okay, I know. We want the children to be the last argument. Cool. Yeah. So that's fine. I wonder if, I was going to say have a default modifier, but I think, to be honest, we just have no default modifier, because that's how the rest of the composables work. Like if we jump into the source for the box, and I think it's a similar thing for the column. Yeah, like the modifier, again, the composable should not be declaring that stuff. So what I'm going to do is, just to avoid breaking everything now, breaking all my styles. Oh, it's actually only, okay, so it's only used 2 places here anyway, so that's fine. So what we could do now is, here we'll use the same rounded background box, but the modifier will be, so it's a pretty big modifier, and I think that might be a bit hard to read, to be honest. So we'll create a little modifier outside of the declaration of the box. Then we can take the children. So yeah, so we can get rid of the box because we've now got the rounded background box. Our modifier is now declared here. Maybe that's a bit easy to follow, and we've passed that in as the modifier for our background box. The children are now being passed through in the body of the rounded background box, and the shape and the background color are now handled by the rounded background box. So in theory, we should be able to delete that, and that shouldn't cause any problems. I'm sure we've all heard that before. So yeah, if I run that, moment of truth, yeah, let's give that a run, see if that works. Cool. Right, we've now launched the app. We should now be able to run it. Our rounded background box is not broken here, which is good to know, and it works here. Nice. Cool. So I hope that shows, like, I think that's a good example of the flexibility of Compose, and like the reusability of the things that we can make, and like splitting things into separate composables, like passing. I didn't do this before because I wasn't planning on using it here originally, but passing in modifiers is kind of like looking at the source code. It's kind of like a default practice. So if you're building composables that you want to be reused, add a modifier argument and allow that to be passed in to the composable. I was going to do like a default modifier here, like, because we're always using max width, but I think it makes sense just to follow what the API is doing and have no default modifier and allow the place where it's being used to define how that should be constructed. So yeah, so this feels pretty good. I mean, there feels like there's a lot going on here, but it's kind of all needed. Like, we have an on-click listener. If it contains it, you remove it. Otherwise, we add it. Then we trigger the creation event, and then we also draw an opacity. So I mean, that could go here, like for example, but I think that becomes very difficult to read. So I think splitting that out into a little variable makes that a bit simpler. Cool. So I think we've done a couple of things today. Just to recap, we fixed the selection state for these because that wasn't being triggered. We've taken the setting of the UI state, and that's been tidied up a bit. I don't feel 100% happy with this. Maybe that's just me being picky, but I think for now that's fine. We're setting the UI state. If we start adding more things, it could get a bit messy, or if these start doing more operations, it could get hard to follow. But for now, I think this feels a lot tighter than it was, and it makes our view model a bit smaller. We then also, what did we do? Yeah, we took some strings. We split out some strings and some category options. Again, these might come from the API in future, but for now they've been split out and accessed using the string resource composables. And finally, we've reused our rounded background box and reused the composables from the other screens for the rounded backgrounds for these category selection items. Cool. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope that was a little bit more of insight into Compose stuff. Yeah, tomorrow maybe if we get a new developer preview, then we'll update to that and see how that goes. Otherwise, I'm going to look at adding some tests for this view model maybe tomorrow, just because there's a lot going on there, and it'd be great to have that covered. But yeah, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great day, and yeah, catch you soon.